Well, Michael Kelly, congratulations on receiving your third consecutive Emmy nomination for playing Doug Stamper on House of Cards. I just want to start by asking, I'm sure you hear this a lot lately, but given our current political climate, does it ever concern you that the Underwoods start to seem kind of normal in comparison?
I mean, no, look, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are obviously troubled by the current political situation in our country, but it's, I don't, I never really think of House of Cards as normal. I understand what people are saying, but we've never been, that tear from the headline show. So we've always been our own show, and I think it's great that the writers were even during filming an election while there was an election happening, were able to maintain and sort of stay true to what that show is, regardless of what the current political climate is.
Well, what's so interesting about it? I mean, it's not, I guess, able to sort of reflect current events in a way because it's got its own sort of track, as you said. I mean, it's really very much like a Shakespearean drama, but in the guise of American politics.
Yeah, and that's been our show. Like we were headed towards that, and also keeping in mind that we, by the time someone sees the show, it could have been a year prior that was written. So it happens that is, that parallels real world. But I think I respect the writers a lot for just always making their story as opposed to making a story reflect current political. The show's really about power. It's not about politics. So it's set in the political world, but it's about power. It's something everyone can identify with.
Right. So this season, I mean, you guys had a lot of really interesting developments with that election. I mean, kind of drawing it out a little bit. And then what happens at the end with Frank, spoiler, I guess I should put a spoiler alert at the beginning of this interview. Can you talk about a little bit about some of the developments and changes that the show went through this season?
Well, I mean, much like any season with our show, there's always going to be things that blow people away, or that I don't think it's to the extent of Game of Thrones, like just killing someone every week, or the madness that ensues. It's not quite like that, but one of the great things about House of Cards is that there's, the way that they can just take these stories and develop them over years, that it's not this, we're not wrapping every episode up in a neat little bow. And, Netflix and a lot of the great television today doesn't do that anymore. You can tell a story over a long period of time. And that's something I love about it.
And your character, Doug Stamper, talk about some of the ways that he grew or developed in this last season.
Well, I think one of the biggest things for Doug this year, obviously, was, and again, spoiler alert, but, was the relationship that developed with him and Leanne, in whatever weird Stamper way that was. But I think the biggest thing was when Francis questioned his loyalty. And obviously then shortly thereafter, they asked the ultimate sacrifice of Doug. But questioning his loyalty was something for me that I was just like, I remember when I first read it, I was like, I just feel like this has to be a bigger deal than it is. It's in my opinion, of that character, that is the one thing you cannot question about that man, especially his loyalty to Francis. So I wanted that to be bigger than it originally written, and we were able to make a great, I don't write anything, but through talking it through, I think they made that scene powerful because of that, and talking it through, obviously, with Kevin. He's such a great collaborator. We were able to come up with what ultimately became.
And that's what happens in chapter 64, which is the episode you've submitted for Emmy consideration. Is that why you submitted that episode, because of that testing of loyalty?
Funny with that whole selection of the episode thing. I have such a hard time with that. Other than season 3, which had its obvious episode for Doug, the first episode where he goes through the recovery and wakes up out of the coma or whatever. The two seasons that follow both times it was incredibly difficult to pick an episode, and I kind of left it up to my team. You know, I left it up to Frank and Melissa and my manager Brian, because I was like, I don't know. You know, I mean, Doug is me saying, oh, like, oh, Michael Kelly, the actor, as Doug. I'm saying that the writing for Doug is so just much like Doug. It just kind of goes through. You know, he very rarely has the explosion or the, you know, or the outburst or the madness. It's just he is, that character is so out saying or doing a lot. You're not doing a lot. It's hard to put into words without sounding like, oh, you know, they're all good. That's not what I'm saying. It's just, you know, whereas season 3, it was very easy. Season 4 and 5 it's very difficult to actually pick one and say, oh, well, that's episode, or however it's done, you know. And I quite honestly, I even texted Robin. I was like, this is funny. I texted Robin. I was like, hey, which one are you for your Emmy nomination? Because my manager said, you got to pick one. And I was like, I don't know. So I said, hey, Robin, which one are you picking? I just didn't want to pick the same one. And she was like, oh, I don't know. I really, to be honest, I really don't even vote on that stuff. I was like, no, man, you got to pick an episode. And she's like, oh, I don't know. And I was like, oh. And so I just sort of left it up to Netflix, my manager, and the writers, and they all sort of seemed to like 12. And then I went back and rewatched it, and I was like, yeah, that's cool by me.
Well, I think they made a good decision, because as you were talking about earlier, I mean, Doug is loyal to a fault, and in this episode, that loyalty is tested. Why does Doug remain so loyal to Frank? I mean, no matter what.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that go on, right? I mean, I think that we've shown over the years that the one thing that gives this guy his drive, makes him tick, is the work. He loves that job. He loves being in the action, and he loves being by Frank's side. Frank and him have had an incredibly long relationship together, and much like Frank said in season 1, I think he said, you know, I can tell which way the wind's blowing. Well, Doug's not a dummy. He can tell too, you know, and he wants to be in that action. That's the right guy to be by his side. And I do believe that Doug believes that Frank is the best person to lead the country. So I've said before that his loyalty to Frank is a byproduct of his loyalty to his job. But there is a lot of, you know, a certain sense of, like, if you think about it, like, it's really, we met my brother in season 3, but you know, Frank's probably pretty much the closest thing that Doug has to someone he would consider family. As dysfunctional as that relationship is, I think Frank go the extra mile for Doug, and you've certainly seen Doug go the extra mile for him. You know, he's tested, and I love that. I love that about the writers, that they always put him in these put Doug in these positions that you just have to, as an actor, look at it and be like, oh my God, what do you do? What do you do here? How do you do this? How do you get through or over this obstacle? And it's a lot of fun. It's to play that.
Right. I mean, throughout these 5 seasons, you've seen Doug, you know, attempt to have relationships in his own way with other people, whether it be, you know, that development this year with Leanne, or with the lady whose husband he sort of killed by taking a liver for Frank, or Rachel Brosnanon's character. I'm blanking on her name right now, but
it was Rachel. Rachel Brosnanon played the role.
Right. Oh, yes, that character is Rachel.
And Laura Moretti was the gal who sort of had that weird. That was crazy, the Moretti stuff, because you know, he's reaching out to a woman. You know, like Doug, it's like anything becomes obsessive. He locks in on it and is like, I have to find out more about this. But that was, you know, the fact that relationship continued into this season. You know, we were talking with the writers, and I was like, I don't know, I mean, this is really weird. Like, he killed her husband, and he has this. He could probably pretty easily walk away from this one. Continued their relationship sexually and whatnot this season. I I remember talking with Frank and Melissa, I was like, I don't know that I truly understand this after we filmed the first scene. And he's like, and Frank, I just remember Frank being like, yeah, but it's so weird. It really works. It's just so like not normal that it actually works. And I was like, all right. So we explored that. And then I love the way we ended that too, you know, with him testing out the confessional and then again testing the confession on Leanne.
Why do you think Doug has such a hard time forming new relationships with people other than the one that he has with Frank?
I'm sorry, you broke up. What was that?
I was asking, why do you think Doug has such a hard time forming new relationships with people other than the one that he has with Frank?
Because he's Doug Stanford.
Right, next question.
I mean, because I don't think that he's really, we've seen, right, that he's not really capable of really probably being sidetracked that much from what he does. You know what I mean? Like, for him, what he does for a living takes over everything. So a relationship's going to be incredibly difficult. And I don't think that he's been in one in so long, maybe not ever, you know what I mean? Like high school or something, you know, like a relationship has just never been his thing. I don't think that he's obviously not asexual or whatever. It's just, he's just not a priority in his life.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, to that end, you share most of your scenes with Kevin Spacey or Robin Wright. 5 seasons in, how has that working relationship between you guys as actors developed?
With each of those two, it's different. You know, for me and Kevin, you know, Kevin's a very private person, and I just give him his space and go to work and be very professional. And you know, he was always very nice to me and whatnot. But I think it was around season 3 that we actually started to talk, and not talk. I don't mean it like that. Like, but we became more friends in 3, 4, and now we've actually, you know, now we text and stuff, and we hang out. So Kevin is, you know, he's someone like, you know, that whole thing with him and Jack Lemmon, you know, that Jack really was instrumental in coming up with Kevin and that whole send the elevator back down thing. And I think Kevin's been incredibly generous to me as an actor, as a person, sort of maybe following in those footsteps of Jack Lemmon. He does it certainly with a lot of younger actors, but he's, you know, you can't ask for much more than being able to hang out with those 2 guys on set every day, him and Robin. It's like they're people that I looked up to when I got the job. And I was just like, oh my God, we get to work with Kevin Spacey and learn from that guy every day. And I have, and I'm so thankful for the experience that we've had together. The really interesting thing with Robin is that my relationship with Robin when she's there as Claire and my relationship with Robin when she's there as a director are completely different. And she's not completely different, like she's crazy or something, but when she's there as Claire, she's sort of in that Claire mode. And when she's there as a director, she's like this young 20-something-year-old girl in her Converse and her, you know, Levi's, and she's just super cool. And she's truly what you call an actor's director. She'll come and get in there in the scene with you and talk it through and be like, let's try this, and is incredibly motivational in that way. So I'm very thankful, and we all, you know, we hung out for election parties and stuff while we were there, and you know, have dinner and stuff from time to time. But the majority of my time there, when I'm not working, is spent with Derek Cecil, who plays Seth Grayson, and Nev Campbell. The 3 of us hung out like a lot, and Jane Atkinson, she's there. But it's just a great group of people. When you can go to work every day and be happy, then, you know, that says a lot about the people you're working with.
And as well, I mean, you mentioned Robin as a director. You guys have a terrific bunch of directors throughout these 5 seasons. What do they give you guys that really help facilitate your performances?
It's interesting how all of them are so so different. You know, I mean, we have that David Fincher sort of overall theme that he set up in the beginning. It was instrumental in laying that out for those first 2 seasons, and sort of saying, you know, like this is how we conduct ourselves on set. This is how we look. And Gary J, our incredible camera operator, has been sort of keeping that tone while still growing as a shooter. But each director brings something different. You know, you have like Agnieszka, who comes and is, you know, she's moving the camera a little bit more. She's sort of breaking some more of the rules. And whereas Robin is sort of like, she's very, you know, David Fincher is someone she very much admires, and I think she sort of stays with that tone. And Alec, and you know, you just have all these different people who bring something different each time, yet it sort of keeps that cohesive tone. So it's interesting, and I love it. I love every time, you know, because we spend a month with these people. We shoot 2 at a time, which is a calendar month. You spend with each director, which is it's a very good amount of time. And then when the new one comes in, it's like there's always that adjustment period, you know, of, oh, the new guy or the new girl, and you know, but now we have a repertoire of people who return that I love. We're blessed with some great directors.
Well, speaking of Fincher, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the beginnings of the show, because it was so kind of new and fresh and interesting in a lot of different ways, not just because of that David Fincher touch, but because this was a show on Netflix. I mean, what were you guys thinking the first time, you know, back in the beginning when you guys were first doing the show? What were you thinking?
Is anyone going to see this? I think it was the biggest question that I had. I remember talking with Constance Zimmer and Kate Marr at lunch one day. We're like, you know, at that point, David Fincher had shown us some stuff, and we were like, holy shit, this is really good, you know. And I remember telling my manager, he asked one day, he's like, Brian's like, hey man, I was like, Fincher showed me like a kind of a rough assembly of part of the first episode, and I was like, we're making a hell of a good show. I just don't know if anyone's ever going to see it. Because at the time, you know, and Constance saying, I remember Constance or Kate, one of them, saying like, you know, you think we'll be eligible for Emmys? Like, it was so new. And that was, now think back, that was only 5 years ago, and how the landscape for television has changed so much. And I mean, look how many nominations Netflix had this year. It's unbelievable what they've accomplished, and now what they've inspired with Amazon and Hulu. And it's an incredible age of television, and I think Netflix can take a lot of credit for that.
Absolutely. So lastly, I just wanted to ask you, I mean, the show ended in such an interesting way, you know, with Frank out of office and Claire assuming the presidency, and there's this big rivalry between them. Where do you see the show going? I mean, I haven't read an official announcement about season 6 yet, but
nor have I.
I would as well. Well, I mean, where? So I guess you don't know where the show might be going then.
Yeah, no. I mean, and that's always kind of, you know, the really interesting thing, you know, is when it does get picked up, or if it does get picked up, is that first trip to the writer's room when you go and you sit down. And I didn't have this season 1 or 2, but now I sort of am given a little bit of insight as to what's to come, and I always love that's a fun day at the writer's room. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing something, hopefully, to do it again, because part of me is like, you know, you don't want it to end like that, but you know, but if it does, then it does, and it's been a hell of a fun run. So I don't know. I'm waiting to hear myself.
Well, Michael Kelly, thank you so much, and congratulations on the Emmy nomination again. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks a lot, man. Have a good one.
You too. Thank you.